Pruitt is a vocal critic of the agency he's now slated to run.
Well, Wolf, that's right. He's a lightning rod pick. The announcement has generated passionate responses on both sides. Republicans have long looked at the EPA as a wasteful agency that overregulates, and they say Pruitt will cut wasteful spending and useless laws. But on the other side, environmentalists call Pruitt dangerous both to Americans' health and the environment.
Scott Pruitt, the man Donald Trump wants to lead the Environmental Protection Agency, has spent most of his career trying to dismantle the agency he could soon lead.
We have an EPA, we have a federal government that is actively involved in picking winners and losers and using regulatory power to penalize fossil fuels.
As Attorney General of Oklahoma, the biggest oil and natural gas producing state in the nation, Pruitt launched multiple legal battles against the Obama administration's key climate change laws, regulations his soon-to-be new boss made clear he opposes.
Department of Environmental Protection. We are going to get rid of it in almost every form. We're going to have little tidbits left.
The Trump transition team says Pruitt, quote, brings a deep understanding of the impact of regulations on both the environment and the economy.
Attorney General Pruitt has been a leader in fighting against excessive regulations from the EPA that have driven up costs for American families and businesses and have been devoid of any real meaningful environmental benefit.
But tonight, critics are pushing back hard, saying Pruitt is a climate change denier. The 48-year-old once said, quote, scientists continue to disagree about the degree and extent of global warming and its connection to the actions of mankind. And in a November radio interview, he gave insight on how he'd run the agency.
Tell us, under a Trump administration, what are you looking forward to?
Regulatory rollback. Washington has become way too consequential in the lives of citizens across the country. They've been dictating to the states, dictating to business, dictating to industry, sometimes outside of the Constitution.
Joy to be with you this morning.
The fastest and easiest action Pruitt can take on day one without help from Congress is to simply not enforce the laws on the books, like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Power Plan. Trump has said his administration will value clean water and air, but his EPA pick has sued the agency at least 12 times, challenging its Clean Power Plan, which seeks to curb carbon emissions from power plants. He's also sued the EPA for trying to curb methane emissions from the oil and gas industry.
As head of EPA, it would be like letting the fox in the hen house.
Pruitt is a strong supporter of the energy industry, and they support him too. In 2014, his campaign committee received more than $700,000 in contributions. More than 17% of that came from energy donors. A 2014 New York Times investigation found he collaborated secretly with the energy industry, sending letters lobbyists wrote for him to the U.S. government attacking the EPA. In a statement today, Pruitt said, quote, I intend to run this agency in a way that fosters both responsible protection of the environment and freedom for American businesses.
Democrats don't have the power to block his confirmation, but lawmakers CNN spoke to said the game plan is to reach across the aisle, have discussions about what's at stake. The big picture here for the Trump administration, this really goes beyond the environment. The philosophy of fewer environmental regulations speaks to President-elect Trump's larger goal of economic growth. The thinking, Wolf, if you get rid of those regulations, get them out of the way, businesses will flourish.
Renee Marsh reporting for us. Thanks very much. Let's bring in Republican Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma. He's a member of the Senate Intelligence and Homeland Security Committees, and you're from Oklahoma.
I am.
This is the Oklahoma Attorney General who's now going to be nominated by the President-elect to take over the EPA. As critics point out, he is a climate change denier. What do you see as his vision for the EPA?
Well, let me start by saying Scott Pruitt is not only a good guy, he's a friend. And I listened to the report and get a chance to watch it. He sued the EPA 12 times because they weren't following the law. That was the issue. And the main focus that I've heard from Scott over and over again is not an issue of trying to tear down the environment or not being environmentally conscious. It's the EPA has a responsibility. That's outlined in law. And where EPA has exceeded that law and gone beyond it to create regulations that violate the law, they should be held to account on it. Most of the laws that we deal with clean water and clean air, have a state requirement that the state is responsible to do a portion, the federal government is responsible to do a portion. What the EPA has tried to do the last 8 years is to do the state's job. And where Scott has pushed back over and over again is not to get rid of environmental regulations. It's to say the federal government should do its job, the states should do their job, and when they cooperate together, it works. Quite frankly, Oklahoma has one of the highest portfolios in the country of renewable energy. And that report talked about how much oil and gas we produce. That's true. 20% of our energy is wind power. Now, we have much higher wind distribution in our state than most any other state in the country. So we are truly an all-of-the-above state, and that's happened in just the last 8 years as well.
You know him well, obviously.
I do know
You're both from Oklahoma. You've worked with him. Do you believe he doesn't believe in climate change, that humans have a role in the climate?
I think his statement that came out there was pretty clear to say there's a lot of dispute on what the effect of man is and how great that is, and that is true. And even what happens now with what we do in America, there's all this great conversation about if we do all these limits in all these different ways, if we try to abide by this pact or this pact, what effect will that have? Because America is not the leading producer of that. Obviously, China, India, all those others are. He has said over and over again, this is a policy issue that should be determined by Congress, not by the EPA.
The other charge against him, and you're hearing it all day today, he's really way too close with the oil industry. The energy industry takes money from them for his campaigns. You saw that New York Times report that he basically forwarded a letter that a lobbyist for the oil industry wrote to the EPA challenging some issue.
Well, if he agreed with the letter and they sent it over, I just don't see the issue with that. To say this is a letter, he agreed with it, can send it on.
When they get a letter, it looks like it's coming from the Attorney General of Oklahoma, as opposed to where it originated, the oil the lobby, if you will.
Sure, and as that report even said, about 17% of his donations came in his last campaign from oil and natural gas. Quite frankly, if you came to Oklahoma, you'd find a tremendous number of companies, both very small and large, that are oil and natural gas. So 17% of his campaign based on companies, which is a major employer in Oklahoma, doesn't surprise me.
Do you think he will try to dismantle almost all of the EPA? You heard the soundbite from the president-elect during the campaign. He'd like to dismantle almost all of the EPA.
Here's what I would think Scott's going to do. Scott's going to follow the law. And where I think there are a lot of Democrat colleagues that are frustrated is the last 8 years the EPA has not followed the law. That's how they've been in so many lawsuits and lost those lawsuits. Many of those suits have gone all the way to the Supreme Court, and even the Supreme Court has said to the administration, you've overstepped your boundary. EPA does not have the right to do that. I expect Scott to follow the law.
Senator, your understanding is he will follow the law, he will implement the law and all the regulations that are part of the laws that are currently in place.
I have no doubt Scott will follow the law, and he'll actually practice and follow through. But what I don't expect him to do is to exceed the law, and that's what the EPA has done the last several years.
Let's talk about John Kelly, who's been nominated retired general, to be Secretary of Homeland Security, third general, now in a sensitive national security, Homeland Security position in the incoming Trump administration. Are you okay with all these generals coming in? Does that bother you at all?
No, it doesn't bother me to have leadership. Obviously, they're stepping in not as a general, they're stepping in a civilian position. They've had great military experience. Our country has tremendous respect for these leaders and what they have done in leading people and leading large organizations. It doesn't bother me for them to be able to step in. And General Kelly was a tremendous leader for Southcom. In fact, in his leadership, just in drug interdictions and what happened in the Atlantic and the Gulf area, he literally in his work there was chasing the drug interdiction to the Pacific side. Now most of the drugs that are moving in the United States move in the Pacific rather than the Atlantic because of his leadership and for what he did to protect the nation and our security.
And it doesn't bother you that the president-elect is interviewing an Admiral Stavridis, the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, maybe for Secretary of State, General Petraeus, also maybe for Secretary of State. That doesn't bother you?
Doesn't bother me. Again, our nation always looks for good leaders and our military leaders. If they were a good leader and they did well there, they've retired and they're in their civilian position, they're civilians now.
You want to tell us who you want to be the Secretary of State?
Well, there's about, I think, 300 people in the running now. I don't have a pick on it, but there are a lot of folks that are being floated and discussed on that. I'll let the president-elect be able to tap his cabinet.
All right, Senator, we have more to discuss, including North Korea. There are new threats emerging even as we speak right now. Much more with the Senator right after this.